Okay, welcome to the show, everyone. I'm Rob Steele, your host, and joining me today is Yousif Oghanna, Chief of Staff to the CEO at Togather. Welcome to the show, Yousif.
Thank you very much, Rob. Appreciate having me on.
Yeah, how are you doing?
Good. Yeah, very well today. The event season at Together, but yeah, it's a fun time to be in the business. All good, man. How are you doing?
Yes, very good. I've been enjoying the summer with the family. But yeah, I've been looking forward to this conversation with you since we spoke a few weeks ago. I think it would be great to kick off in terms of your journey, your career journey, from the earlier days of that career and just talking about that and how you got into the chief of staff role that you have at Together. I think that would be a really interesting place to start off with.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll take you right back to the very beginning, I guess. So I'm Iraqi. I came to the UK when I was a young boy, and I think like many sort of typical refugee background stories, my parents always saw me kind of doing a very safe thing. I had no idea what chief of staff was, at this stage, and as encouraged to take a safe path, accounting, medicine, not a doctor for my sins, but that sort of thing. And so that's what I did. I went to uni and I studied economics with a view to going into consulting, and that is where my journey kind of takes this really typical path, to be honest. And I had a really enjoyable time doing that. I worked for Aon as a management consultant for around 5 years. And it was a great experience, really, really strong team that I learned a lot from. But the kind of things that we were advising on, it was largely the FTSE 250 strategic type projects. After 5 years or so, I found myself thinking, I don't really want to be advising from the outside. I want to be kind of building from the inside. Every time we'd be handing over an advisory paper, I was thinking, what happens next? I want to be understanding and actually be decision making at a business level operationally. And so I was lucky enough to know a friend who was building something at the time. He was like, "Hey, I have an idea for a startup." Again, no context, no idea at this stage what a startup is, what the venture ecosystem looks like, or anything like that. So he was building this events tech startup, and he said, "I think that there's a real problem that needs solving here, which is that people don't know how to find good food and drink for events. There's very little discovery, don't know where to begin." And I said to him, "Okay, well, let me help you raise a small angel round because I knew slightly more about numbers, finance, and modeling than he did, and we'll go from there." And that's what we did. And then a role became available. And when I joined what is now Together, I joined as a head of finance and operations. And through that, over time, organically, as we built the business around us, we built the team up, moved from generalists to specialists. A couple of years ago, my role transitioned to a chief of staff. And again, I think my parents just about understand what I do right now. But that initial sort of leap was a little bit, baffling. And I think that VC startups and tech, if you're not kind of in that ecosystem, there is a big kind of educational barrier, let alone kind of explaining what a chief of staff does. So I think it's been a relatively non-linear route, but a couple of years ago, essentially my role within the business transition to being chief of staff.
Yeah. Going back to your time as a consultant, what were the sort of, I guess, experiences, skills, activities that you were doing that were potentially transferable or sort of building the sort of foundations, being able to go into the startup ecosystem, and then onto a chief of staff? Was there any sort of fundamental capabilities that you think, looking back now, that were really useful?
Yeah, I do. I think it's often like a career path that gets, quite a lot of stick, but there are some core skills that I really kind of carry with me. One is just a vast variety of different people that you deal with, the functions that you deal with. I was fortunate in that the type of consulting I was working in, we worked with executive boards. So there was an element where you felt like, okay, this is great. I can actually look at the business in a top-down respect, and I have to consider many various stakeholders and figure out how to collaborate with them. I have to think about what the impact of this is going to be on a people function or on-ground operations function. We have to think about what this might do to brand, all those kind of things. And so there's a really kind of key pillar, I think, of a good chief of staff, which is being able to have cross cross-functional influence without necessarily having that authority. And I think that that is one of the kind of core things that consulting does give you a bit of an insight into. I think the second thing that it also gives you is, and perhaps this is just unique to my experience, but you get to see the big picture discussions pretty early on. And what that means is that you're then, the way you think about decision making framework and the lens that you view things through is at a big picture. And I really think that as the reality of being a chief of staff is that your role is to look around corners or always be thinking 5 or 6 steps, ahead of everyone and what the impact of decision making is, being able to zoom out and look, the business at a sort of bird's eye, 50,000 foot view, when you can allow your senior colleagues to be focused more on the sort of granular day to day. And I do think that that's something that, at least for me, I picked up in consulting as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And you've built out a toolkit, I guess, working in a startup in terms of your leadership and your chief of staff capabilities. Could you talk a little bit more about that? How did you go about building that? Is that sort of best practices that you've learned over the time? Is it something you document or something you've just got as a sort of mental memory?
Yeah, it's a great question. A lot of it is muscle memory and experience over time. I mean, I've been with Together for around 7 years now, and it's, if you think about the kind of experiences that I would have had, I feel like it's like doing an MBA on acid multiple times over kind of thing. It's like the best education experience you could have, and
Yeah,
so a lot of my experience, what I've learned, and my toolkit has grown organically based on experience. So the first time that me and the CEO went out to market to fundraise or then figure out how to manage our investor base effectively, how to keep them engaged, how to run board meetings, there was a real growth curve between the first time we did that and now. If we think about large strategic projects and how the business has sort of managed them, how we sit into more success and knit the business so that everyone knows exactly what they're doing. Again, wildly different picture now than it was when we joined. We made all of the mistakes over that period, and we were fortunate enough to kind of do that and continue and still thrive. So I think a lot of it has been organic, but at the same time, I do try to document things and have a little sort of a Notion page with my like personal leadership style and things like that. One of the things that I wanted to commit to when I became chief of staff Together, because I transitioned from more of like an FD kind of role, was a commitment to development. I didn't want to walk in on the Monday with a new title and a new role and essentially just do the same thing and there'd be a status quo. I wanted to kind of make a commitment to doing things differently. So one of the things I focused on was structured learning. So I actually I did a course with the Chief of Staff Association, a sort of 9 month core competency program, which was fantastic. It was it's pretty hands on, and you get a lot of insight and dialogue and collaboration with other chief of staffs, frankly, around the world, which really opened my eyes to how much variety there is in the chief of staff role. But that was able to, I think, develop on a few more hard skills that I didn't necessarily have, and it was also super fun. I think that a lot of the modules and topics that we were doing, whether it was things like influence authority, crisis communications, I kind of think back to the more organic soft skills that I'd learned in my time together and think like, okay, so that's what we were doing. Or wow, maybe we should have done that. So a mixture of the two, to be honest.
yeah, yeah. And how that's really interesting. And how has I guess your development continued? Have you done anything else, either formally or informally, to continue into as the role evolves within Together, or as the company evolves and develops? How have you kept up with that? Because it's very founder shaped, the chief of staff role, and as the sort of context changes, how have you adapted to that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I really kind of believe that the chief of staff shaped hole that you fill, it changes over time, but it's also so unique to business at that point in time. I mean, one thing that we'll regularly do it together is I have a really open dialogue with the founders and the senior team, and when we onboard a new senior team member into the executive team, we'll often kind of go and look at the Venn diagram and crossover of all our roles and responsibilities and restrike it a little bit every 6 months or so to sort of try and ensure that the journey for the next 6 to 12 months and what we want to achieve, we are really kind of committed and intentional about what everyone's role is. There is an element of it which is organic, and as sort of new things come in, you'll choose to pick them up, or they'll naturally go and settle on somebody else's shoulders. So I think there's only so like rigid that we should be, but we do want to make a commitment to kind of continually thinking, how should this be shaped? What is the right division of responsibility here? And then I think more, I guess, outside of Together, I'm also just keen to make sure that I hone those skills in a different environment. So I've been fortunate enough to kind of get involved with a couple of really interesting extracurricular things outside of my time Together as well. One of them was involvement with a charity called the 93% Club, who have a fantastic team, and they're essentially focused on um, upskilling the state school experience and improving social mobility into the workplace. And when they began, essentially were sort of 50 societies at university across the country needed a kind of core group charity level organization. And I helped them sort of build out the trustee and advisory board and figure out some kind of good core ways of working and apply lessons that through trial and error we eventually learned together into this new environment. And so I find that that's also a really helpful experience because it lets me think about some new decision making lenses and frameworks, but still applying the same kind of core skills.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, you can take a lot of inspiration and learning from different contexts and bringing it in and, pollinate, from other areas into work and from work into other areas, right? And
Totally.
help yourself and others learn and grow.
Yeah.
In terms of relationships and trust, in your role, you're crossing, across different lanes, you're getting involved in initiatives and touching processes and workflows across different functions. How do you go about developing trust with the principal that you support, but also the other parts of the business, and keep things moving
Mm.
fast enough without stepping on people's toes, right? How do you manage that balance?
Yeah, it's for sure a tricky balance. I think there's the kind of core thing building that platform you have to build from is really having a low ego and championing the business. I think that if there is an understanding and you can really clearly get it across to people quickly that your only role and the role that you're playing and when involving yourself in certain areas is the business best interest and often their best interest and being able to relay that in a sort of non-emotional way, that's a really kind of big part to building trust. And I think if you can achieve that, then that's part of the battle already won. Communication is it's not just the content of it, it's delivery. So the content can be, let's say, sensitive or adversarial or etc. But if the delivery, I think, is kind, then it goes a really, really long way. So I'll always try and champion that. And I think that in terms of building trust, that part of that is that's a really big part of it, I think for sure.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And you mentioned earlier about board meetings, running board meetings. That's obviously a key element of a chief of staff normally in startups and managing, doing the pre-board meeting sort of setup and engagement and how to plan, prepare, run, post
Mm.
board meeting follow-ups and things like that. How do you guys run your board meetings? What does that look like and how has it evolved over time? Like what have you learned from your perspective to make sure that that goes as smooth as possible?
Yeah, I think my personal feeling is that less more frequently is better. We've transitioned as of about last September to monthly board meetings
Hmm.
and shorter monthly board meetings. And I find that they mean that everyone is more in the loop around the room and strategy, and they understand what's going on. There's a consistent narrative that's being built, and you don't have to spend long times kind of catching the room up or ensuring that there's really like vast materials that are produced. So I think that's definitely one learning. And right now we're in a really good rhythm with them. And I think part of that is always having an eye on, what we want to be talking about the next meeting, ensuring that there are consistent threads, ensuring that we're kind of proactive about catching up outside of that meeting in any case, because really I think it should be a bit of a good form to discuss things, a bit of a formality, but really the role of kind of keeping the board engaged is a lot more than just the board meeting. But I mean, we've been on a real journey, and I think now we're in a good place. But when we first started, it was a different story. I think one of the main benefits that we've had together, we've got an amazing cap table, amazing board and chairman. And when I joined and when we first began running board meetings, we had a pretty different sort of roster, and one that was pretty a background of high corporate governance, essentially. So quite a strong kind of like corporate and FTSE background. And what that meant was that our rigor was really high from day one. It was sort of quarterly board meetings with really glossy packs. We printed like every single page out and ensured that it was like on the table and everything was perfect when people walked in. Sometimes that backfired. I distinctly remember one meeting where our now commercial director, George Blesson, had to come sort of running in midway through the meeting, dripping in sweat because the printer had been working and he had to go and get different ink and refit it, all of those kind of things. And over time, I've kind of realized that it's about ensuring that, they don't necessarily want a glossy deck. They want candor, clarity, and consistent themes. And I think another sort of more personal learning is that I think we always used to be a little bit in pitch mode for the first sort of, let's say, half of my tenure. We always wanted to just tell the positive story. Here's how we're smashing it, knowing that we were still on the early stage of our investment S curve. So we were probably going to, go and seek more financing, and when our runway was near its end. So I think we always had one eye on that. Whereas now I think we have a much clearer vision of what the business's long-term goals are. We speak about almost exclusively, those, and we talk about the most important things while showing some vulnerability. I think I'm lucky enough now to, work with some startups on an advisory basis, and I do some angel investing and run a syndicate there. And I know sort of firsthand now that it's really refreshing when you get that level of vulnerability and you feel like you can engage in the journey and advise and, help on those goals. And it's far less interesting when someone's just like, here's how we're smashing it. And there's like nothing you can do, like this meeting's a dud, who cares? Because so I think there's a learning journey happened. I think we're a good place now where they're very much like trust-based and we have a good work relationship.
Yeah, it sounds like you're into a very healthy sort of partnership sort of place where,
That's it.
there's trust and understanding, and you see that sort of regular 1 monthly sort of cycle has really helped with the engagement, and that consistency really helps with developing the
That's it.
trust, right?
Exactly.
And you can be more real, right? You can say like, okay, these are the areas that we're hitting out of the park, but these are the areas that we still need to, work on, or the challenge, and have a proper conversation about those and how you can work through those challenges. Because every startup
Yeah.
goes, right, and you'll see that with your, the advisory side of things that you're on as well. Every business has challenges, and it's being open and transparent, as much as you possibly can with these, and you'll get the best way through it, if you work together.
Yeah, totally. And it's a really important function that the board provides. I think in my role as the chief of staff, it's really important to try and cultivate that and ensure that we're having the right conversations at that board level and that there is the right level of engagement and support. Because look, sure, some startups scale up, you're going to find lightning in a bottle and it's going to be amazing and there's just no issues. You're never going to need a board support. But for the vast majority of startups, it's going to be, more of this kind of journey
Yeah.
to the top. And so it's normal to have those tricky, difficult conversations at a board level, and you need to let a board do that. And so I think, yeah, in my role, it's key or a key learning I've had is ensuring that actually, like, look, if we're speaking about it as founders, and it's either taking up a lot of our headspace or we're super excited about it, we should probably speak about it at a board level.
Yeah, agreed. What does your operational rhythm look like, when you're sort of partnering and working with the CEO on a week-to-week basis? Do you have sort of, do you bookend the week with meetings or sync ups, or do you do it asynchronously? How does that look for you guys? Again, how has that evolved, and what have you learned that works for you, for your pairing?
Yeah, it's a great question. Currently, I mean, we have trialed a lot of different things, and I think the nice thing about it being a startup is that you can rip something up and try something new the next day. Currently, we run things a little bit more async. We'll probably spend, I would say, an hour with each other a day because a lot of the projects that we work on, there's a lot of crossover. But because of that, the fact that we work on kind of greenfield, large strategic projects, it does mean that we have to be quite mobile, active, and agile. And so currently async, a very live sort of Slack and WhatsApp thread, and we'll speak on the phone very regularly. Most days we'll jump in a room, when it's a good time for both of us. We've historically tried more structured things. Might be we begin the week with a coffee stand up or something like that, or we'll book end of the week. But what we kind of found was that because we are needing to be so agile at the moment, they turn into just ceremonies for the sake of it. Because if we need to speak to each other or we need to kind of find time to have a conversation, we'll do it. So I think in that respect, we run things pretty organically. The one thing that I think we have done historically, which we kind of continue to do now, is just making sure that we have our sort of things on the board for the week that we want to achieve. Because whilst access to each other and it is can be agile, I think the things that we want to achieve that week need to be somewhat immovable. We need to constantly realign ourselves to right. These are the big two or three things that I want to make sure I get done this week. Otherwise, we'll lose sight of them. With the other executive team members, it is a little bit more rigid, got more in terms of ways of working, more frequent touch points, more of the we have our sort of weekly stand-ups or commercial meetings. So I think there's more structure around that essentially. But I think that's just the nature of how much we collaborate with one another as founders.
Yeah. What does that structure look like, and how do you interface with that? Like, is there OKRs, some other sort of goal or KPI tracking sort of framework that you use? And how do you ensure things are on track? What's your involvement in that process?
Yeah, good question. We do use OKRs. I think right now for us it's the framework that we used for a long time. I've always been slightly skeptical to how well we use it, but from speaking to peers, my understanding is it's pretty common to be questioning them, but really the how is more important than the outcomes with them. But we use OKRs. We have company-wide OKRs that roll down into team ones, and we we refresh them quarterly essentially. In terms of my role, it's steering that discussion and ensuring that we have a very clear line of sight to how we measure them. So we'll use look for our data tool or sheets or otherwise to have output metrics and KPIs that roll up into these OKRs, so people have a kind of clear line of sight to them. We'll speak about them on a monthly basis at our company's town hall. So every 4 to 6 weeks, we'll have a sort of half day where we tools down and just spotlight on business performance and OKRs. And then on a sort of, yeah, I guess rolling 6 weekly basis, we'll be managing the process of refreshing them, understanding, how we're doing to date, midway through the quarter. We'll give a kind of broad RAG update or emojis, etc. And then we'll begin the process of looking forward and understanding, right, which should we smash? Great, clear them, pick a new type of topic. Which ones do we think are still really fit for purpose? Roll them over. Which ones do we actually think we didn't achieve, but it's not important strategic for next quarter? And that conversation will typically begin at an exec level where we'll have a half day and sort of flesh out what we believe the most important objectives next quarter are. And then we'll bring in the wider team to kind of set the KRs. We'll often try and engage the team as well, so they feel ownership and ensure that they are like presenting to the rest of the business on, hey, here's your KR team for this specific KR, and get them up and have it presenting and things like that. So my role specifically will be ensuring that they are managed in a timely manner so that we've always got them ready for the next quarter, and that there's really clear visibility and line of sight to them on an ongoing basis, and that we're feeding back with some frequency.
Great stuff. Obviously, we can't have a podcast without talking about AI. How are you using AI in the company and in your role? Have you found anything that's been super useful for you as a chief of staff, or you've helped deploy into the business that's really sort of, helped with productivity or whatever it might be?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like the AI conversation is moving so fast that to create actual structured approach to it, strategic like within a business,
Yeah.
can be quite challenging. But I mean, the first thing that we do is just make sure that there's a really clear, ongoing dialogue at a senior level. So we'll spotlight it on it at our exec meetings, and we'll make sure that there's channels on site that people are kind of sharing their use cases. But more than that, our CTO and product lead have been tasked with ensuring that it sort of permeates throughout the rest of the business. We haven't yet set formal goals of things like we want X percentage of workflows to be using it by team, because if you consider Togather as a business, we have got one side of the business which is core and sort of digital tech focused and sort of automated end-to-end marketplace, very standard, model on that side. And the other really is almost like a physical agency on the live side. So there'll be elements that it's more appropriate to. I think what we're also doing at like a senior level is ensuring that there's a AI hurdle for investments. And that's not to make it more tricky for people to like business cases for software and stuff, but it's just to ensure that they are thinking about it. If we want to price in, if we think about a new hire or something, okay, great. What is the business case that means that with AI, this isn't something that we could achieve today? We'll regularly feedback and spotlight around the business on what's being used well. I know our CTO estimates that there's been around a 30% efficiency increase in our R&D team in terms of the ability to deploy in the cleanliness of the code as a result, which, totally makes sense against other benchmarks I've seen. In terms of what I love, I mean, the ability to kind of organize and produce internal content. My world has been kind of changed a little bit for the better. There's stuff that's come up before, but I'm in love with Fixer. I think their product is incredible. I do have to often separate the strategic end game of these tools for the short term use, because it's probably revolutionized how I interact with my inbox. I spend little to no time on it on a daily basis at the moment, and it's wonderful. But at the same time, I am mindful that continued innovation in this space will kind of mean that, when Rob and Yousif are interacting, it's just sort of versions of ourselves that are sending like pulses to one another, and we're not really communicating. But whatever, that's a problem for another time. I love Granola as well, the note taking tool. I love that it doesn't you know there's no awkward sort of like this recording has begun, and the fact you can then interact with it and add your notes before it sort of generates them, it is great. And then standard notebooks and Claude for producing long form copy for board or synthesizing contracts, that kind of thing. So it's very much, I would say, like with a suite of those three tools, you have a really good core chief of staff co-pilot. And I'm sure there are more formal chief of staff co-pilots in development right now. And if anyone does listen and watch, I'm open-minded, and let me know if those do exist. But yeah, what are you finding is
Yeah, I've used Fixer, and I thought that tool is fantastic, and you can see the sort of the trajectory they're on.
yeah,
Granola I also love. Use it. I think it's really good that when it joins the meeting, it doesn't actually join the meeting. You know,
exactly.
it's sometimes in meetings you have like three note takers and two people on the call. It gets it a little bit crazy. And as you say, afterwards, you can query it and ask it questions. You can actually say, okay, so how could I improve, or what could I have done differently, and things like that, rather than just
Yeah,
ask factual questions. It almost acts as a coach as well, which I think is fantastic as well. And I think, with the other AI sort of technologies that are coming out here, especially around voice, you can start seeing sort of real-time coaches and see what Cluely's doing, and get these sort of co-pilots that are running alongside the chief of staff role that will really help amplify the chief of staff, but
exactly.
also the principal that they're supporting as well. And I hope it
Yeah,
frees up time for more in-person, real conversations like we're having now, or, meet up for a coffee or a lunch or whatever it
yeah,
might be. I hope it frees up that, and not just frees up stuff to do other busy work, but actually does enable people to have real connection with other humans. So
yeah,
I see the positive side of the trajectory of the where the tech's going just now.
yeah. I totally agree.
Cool. All right. So, Yusuf, this has been really, really useful. I think it would be great for you maybe just to have or share your thoughts around where you see the chief of staff role going, or the traits for new people coming into the role or people considering
Mm.
the role. What should they be thinking about, for coming into this role?
Yeah, it's a great question. I definitely see it becoming a more prominent role. I think the growth of sort of chief of staff roles has been fantastic over the last 5 years in particular. But I think that the value that it holds in particularly in AI powered startup world is really valuable. And I'll speak to CEOs and they'll ask, when is the right time to hire a chief of staff? I think that, as I said earlier, every single role is unique. You can wipe away the name of the role and look at the responsibilities underneath. Ultimately, what that responsibility is in my mind is to be a catalyst for growth. It's to amplify the work that everyone else around you is doing. As you highlighted earlier, trust is a really core part of that. That means, you know, saying what you're going to do and ensuring that you do it so that people see you as someone who is responsible and delivers. But yeah, I think for incoming chief of staff, that is the value that I'd carry. Is that your role is essentially to multiply the impact of people around you, and it's to be a sort of value add, rather than there's the sort of more operational elements of the chief of staff role. But I think the investments that will be being made in it as a future will be more strategic. There will be someone who needs a kind of a generalist who can get a lot done, who's focused on new problems. I'd say if anyone is interested in it, then it's a great role because you get to interact with such a wide range of business kind of problems, solutions, and people. But each chief of staff role is unique. So I was fortunate enough to essentially be able to build my own. And yeah, I think it's been great. So for anyone interested in it, I definitely think it's worth pursuing.
Excellent, excellent. I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. So, Yusuf, this has been a phenomenal conversation. I really want to thank you for taking the time out. I know you've got a very incredibly busy schedule together, but I think your insights that you've, learned over the years, as you sort of scaled together with the team, have been invaluable, right? So, thank you very much for sharing your experiences and expertise with the listeners.
Pleasure.
That people can follow along with you? If you got a website, social media, or like that.
Yeah, so just on LinkedIn /Yousif Oghanna. Yeah, feel free to connect me. Always happy to take forward and take a conversation. Um,
Excellent, excellent. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to another episode. Join us next time for more in-depth discussions with leading chiefs of staff like Yusuf. Thank you very much, Yusuf,
Thanks so
again.
much, Rob.
Thanks very much, everyone.